Alright gamers, another day, a new project, here he is! Oh, hello, it's me, so Aznable, I'm the son of misfortune of you, but he's just a little guy. And this is what we're going to be making over the next week, 2 weeks, months. I got this figure, I love this figure, it's got a lot of detail on it, so it's probably what I'm going to be using as a reference. Look at that embroidery. Look at that. Fucking amazing. Also, look at this. Anyway.
Char's outfit is based heavily on 19th century European military dress, and I happen to be lucky enough to have access to some similar historical garments. This is an early 20th century Irish Guard uniform, and I'm looking very closely at how it's constructed, seeing where the padding is, where the kind of shaping, how the effect of this is made, because I want to replicate it. Between this jacket and the wee figurine that I've got, we can start to piece together exactly what Char Aznable's uniform might look like in real life, and not just as a two-dimensional drawing. Once we know what we're doing, it's time to hit the pattern cutting table. The first thing I do is put my binder on. This is because if I want this cosplay to fit perfectly, which I do, I need to first establish exactly what shape my body is going to be underneath it. Pattern cutting is a big equation, essentially. You input your measurements and values into a formula and you follow the steps to get your result. I use Winifred Aldrich because I learnt to pattern cut in the UK, but there's a lot of variation, especially across culture and language. And with our pattern made, it is now time to cut our fabric. Is not what I'm going to say, because first we have to add our seam allowances. I cut my patterns without them. I really like being able to see exactly where my seam line is when I'm sewing. It just allows for so much more precision and accuracy. I'm also going to be using these same pattern pieces to cut out the lining, the interlining, the backing, and I'm going to be adding very slightly different amounts of seam allowance for all of those. This just makes it easier. And now I assemble the outer of the jacket, but only the torso, only the body. I haven't even cut the sleeves out yet. This is because before I get onto sleeves, I want to check the fit of the body, see if there's anything I need to alter. Spoiler alert, there is. So I go ahead and unpick and alter and tweak and change. There's a lot of changes, but eventually I'm satisfied with what I have. And when I am, I take everything apart again, because I'm using these now as my pattern pieces to cut out the lining and all the other bits. There's also interfacing, which I'm ironing onto the main fabric in order to make it thicker and more suit-like in texture. There's padding, which I'm adding to the shoulders and chest area in order to bulk them out and make me look a bit more Dorito-esque in shape. There's tailor's canvas, which I'm going to put down the fronts to like support the fastenings, keep that from deforming. There's all sorts of things going on to this. It's quite an involved process, and all these have to be tacked together by hand. First of all, I tack the inner layers in with a permanent sort of zigzag tacking stitch, and then the outer layers get tacked on with, okay, well, it's the same stitch, but it's just, I'm going to remove it later. So this is an impermanent zigzag tacking stitch. After everything's put together, we can actually start to attach different pieces to each other. I'm doing this lining up the seam lines with each other. These have been changed and altered. You can sort of see that there's less seam allowance by the hips. That's because I needed extra space in this area to accommodate for my ass. For this jacket, I ended up making my own shoulder pads, mainly because I just didn't have any and I couldn't be bothered going to the shop. So to do that, you just cut various shapes of wadding, tack them together in layers to get the shape you want, and then I just put them in, check their positioning, and when I'm happy with that, I lightly tack them into position along the shoulder seam and around the edges. It's very important to me that the stitches don't show from the outside. No one can know there's a shoulder pad. I mean, I guess technically for this, it's going to be covered by a cape and epaulettes, so it doesn't really matter. But listen. The last thing I do to finish the torso outer is fold over the front edges and secure those down with the herringbone stitch. I'm still going to slip stitch the lining in later, but we'll get to that after I do the sleeves. Speaking of sleeves, I measure my sleeve head first because it's changed shape quite dramatically since I first drafted this. You know, I've tried it on, trimmed it away and things like that. And I put it on the stand, mark out where the pitch points more or less are these days, and then go back to my paper pattern and alter the paper pattern to match what the jacket now looks like. And then I can actually start to draft a sleeve. So I draft a sleeve. I'm drafting this in 2 pieces, an upper piece and a lower piece, so that the sleeve can have some forward curve and that helps it hang better and look nice on the body. And then I make it up sort of fairly similar to before. There's no seam allowances, I add them on later, I make it up. The sleeves don't have any kind of interfacing or support or padding. And after I've done one, I just try that on, check that everything's okay. It was not all okay, so I went back, changed some things about the pattern, and once I'm happy with that, make the sleeves up, put them both in. So lining pieces are usually the same kind of pieces as the suit pieces, but they're slightly bigger in places. And because this is a more couture approach to suit making, we're going to be just slipping that in completely by hand. First, I insert it, start pinning it into place, and put it on the stand to check that everything's hanging right. I'm not going to fully sew it in quite just yet, not until I do the collar. Similar to my sleeves, I like to draft my collars after I've finished everything else, sort of directly on to the jacket torso itself. This is probably because I have a bit of a weird neck, so I just want to make sure they fit. What I do is essentially draping using paper, where I'll cut a strip and angle it around the neck and then cut nicks into it to ensure that it's at the right angle all the way around. After I've made my initial pattern with the cuts, I'll go and recut that on a fresh sheet of paper and just check it again against the collar to see if it fits. So once I've got that down, I cut it out same as before, and I'm making a sort of test version here. But I'm making it up as usual with the backing fabric, tailor's canvas, interfacing, the whole shebang. So the interfacing is ironed to the fabric and the tailor's canvas is stitched onto the backing, and then everything is put together and the whole thing turned inside out. Even though this is just a test piece to start with, I'm still making sure to press it and iron it and do everything properly. Colours are finicky, they're hard to get into the right position, so I am first of all tacking it on by hand. Once it's on by hand, before I machine stitch it, I try the jacket on, check that everything is right. In fact, the thing is, I did this test piece so precisely that I kind of just ended up reusing it as my regular collar because it did fit and it worked well. So it's embroidery time, gamers. So for the embroidery, we are using gold leather, you can see it there. I'm also going to be outlining that in some gold Russian braid. Once I figured out my final design, I go ahead and make symmetrical copies of those shapes using some carbon paper, well, dressmaker's carbon paper, because that's what I have lying around, and I transfer that to the back of the leather and cut them out. When I've got all my pieces cut out and I'm satisfied that they all look reasonably okay, I then tack them lightly into position. This isn't to hold them down, it's just to hold them in place while I put the Russian braid on. Now, Russian braid is great because it's sort of made of these two cords. The two halves of the Russian braid function independently of each other. So to turn a corner, you could just sort of pull at the inner of the cords and make it turn that corner. I'm also on the pointy edges, sort of folding it over on itself, but in the inner corners and the more gentle curves, it's really easy to sort of adjust it and make it curve nicely. And the other good thing about having these two halves of it is that there's a wonderful little space in between the two of them for your stitches to go. You just put a back stitch or a running stitch or whatever kind of stitch you want down the middle, and bada bing bada boom, you got yourself some nice embroidery. And then you can just attach it to the rest of the jacket like normal, you know, tack it, line everything up, machine it, press it, make it look nice. But we have still got the rest of the embroidery to finish because there is a line of gold along the bottom of Char's collar as well. So we're just taking the bits that we haven't quite done yet and going through them. And once we've done that, we can finish off the jacket collar. First, I tack down the inside of the collar to the inner seam of the jacket and then slip stitch the lining over on top of it, and that's a couture finish, baby. And finally, before we finish everything off, we are going to put in some pockets. Very important. I'm just doing some angled welt pockets at the front, which I actually realized is more of a Federation design motif, but whatever, no one's going to see them, it's fine. They're going to be under the capes. For fastenings, I am using hooks and eyes and alternating them between sides. Once I have those sewn in, I then bring the lining up to the edge of them and just tuck them underneath it to finish it neatly. For the bottom of the jacket, I'm just slip stitching the lining down again, but I'm folding it under and making sure that between the outer and lining I have some wiggle room so that the lining doesn't pull at the outer. And that's it. I take the tacking out, I declare myself finished, and it's only the base that I've got finished. We've got a lot more to do, baby. I've got some epaulettes. The epaulettes are yellow. They should not be yellow, they should be gold. That's right. I'm just painting the epaulettes with gold spray fabric paint. It actually works pretty well. They got deformed a little bit, but after a little bit of steam and a little bit of hanging for a bit, they turned out absolutely fine. So now for Char's cape. I'm going to be draping this, which isn't a process that I'm very familiar with. I'm more of a cutter than a draper. I've got some black boiled wool for the cape. I think that it hangs very nicely. I think it's got a nice weight to it, and I'm excited to use it. I'm just using the fashion material that I'm going to be using. I'm not worrying about calico, partially because I know calico is just not going to sit the way that the final material is going to sit, so I might as well just use it. I don't really have any draping tips. You just kind of do it and tweak the fabric until it looks the way you want it to look. Once I have that all draped and I've got my pattern figured out, hey, guess what? It's time for embellishment. I'm very excited about this. I'm using my figure to figure out what the design should be, doing a good paper full-size mock-up so I can check that everything's gonna look good. Once we have that, I am gonna be cutting this out in gold leather. This stuff is usually used for gold work embroidery, which, okay, to be fair, is what I'm doing, but it's usually sold in tiny little 10cm pieces, but I'm going to be using a lot of it. I decided to treat myself. This is probably, relatively speaking, the most expensive part of this cosplay, but I thought it was really important to really nail the eye-catching effect that that front lapel design has for Char. It's sort of the first thing you see when you look at him. So we're treating ourselves, alright? Once I have those designs, I then transfer it onto the back of the gold leather, and also I fix all the layers of the front capes together, because there's several. There's a felt layer, the leather layer, the backing layer. It's all going to sit nice. I then stitch around the outline of the wing design with just a machine and a top stitch, and then after I've done that, I cut out the gold leather much more accurately. To finish off the edge of these wing designs, I'm going to be using some lovely Russian braid. Now, this is all hand stitching, this is all embroidery, this is all taking quite a long time to do, but it is absolutely worth it because it just makes everything pop and makes everything just look finished. And now that we've got the embellishment on the front done, I can go ahead and line both the capes. I am using this silk chiffon that I found in my local fabric store. Very bad idea to use silk chiffon, the most structureless, catchiest, droopiest fabric, but hey, it was the right colour and it was on sale, okay? I used the capes themselves to give structure to the chiffon while I was sewing it. I pinned everything together and bagged it out, sewed around the outsides to then turn things inside out and just cut off the excess chiffon. I never had a pattern piece for these capes, so I couldn't even just cut out a pattern and line it up. The wool of the capes was kind of my saving grace because wool you can just kind of steam into the shape that you want it to be. I actually did the cape lining in 2 stages. First I sewed the chiffon to the insides, then I moved it slightly to the side and sewed it to the outsides. This was to make sure that there was less fabric on the inside lining than there was on the outside, so that the lining had less of a tendency to gape and swivel outward to the outside. There was always like a little border of the black wool around it. And after that, it was just a matter of tacking the lining into place so it wouldn't droop, and then figuring out that there was even more tacking to do and doing more tacking and into place so it wouldn't droop. Oh my god, never use chiffon as a lining. What were you thinking, Sarah? Why? Before we can go through the same process for the front capes, we have to put some fastenings in them. I am using a lightweight open-ended zip, specifically a basque zip, and I'm just sewing that on like normal. I'm sewing it to the wool part of the capes, and I'm then going to cover that fastening with the gold leather. Hopefully, when the zip is closed, the gold leather should just kiss perfectly in the middle, completely hiding the zip, and I think I pulled it off reasonably well. So once I've done that, I can then just get cracking with the horrible silk chiffon that we hid. I'm just doing the same process as before, putting it on the front, sewing around the edge, trimming the excess off, and then turning the whole thing inside out. Again, this is wool, it's quite forgiving. If you want it to sit a certain way or be a slightly different shape, you can kind of just steam it into that shape. It's wonderful stuff, wool. Now that we have our capes done, it's time to attach them to the jacket. First, we have to figure out exactly where they're going to sit on the collar. I'm doing this through a trial and error process. I'm folding it over, checking it, changing it. Once I have the curve correct, I'm just going to sew it down with a little cross stitch and then bring the chiffon lining up and slip stitch that down, all nice and neat. Also, for good measure, I'm putting a little tack around the edge just in case that's going to have a tendency to droop. I do not trust this stuff. To put it on the cape, I am just doing a final one last check to make sure it sits exactly right, and then I will of course be hand sewing it. This is the part where the sort of couture finish really comes in, because I could not get an at all neat finish like this with a machine. To finish things off completely, I give it final steam just to make sure all those wool fibres are behaving themselves, sitting exactly right, and then it's time to do the back. Rinse and repeat the process. I get it exactly, precisely where I want it to be, and this one I'm doing a little bit differently. When I have it sitting where I want it to sit, I will then tack it on through the body of the jacket, through all layers of the lining, and then I'm going to be folding that over and meeting that black wool of the cape right up against the gold braid of where the start of the collar is. And then again, couture finish baby, sewing it down by hand. As well as sewing it to the collar, I'm also reinforcing it at the front edges where the two capes meet and just all around the shoulder to hold that in place. This doesn't need to be finished well because it's going to be covered by a gold epaulette. I can just kind of push a bunch of imperfections under them and then use them to cover it. The epaulettes themselves are going to be attached in a bit of a non-traditional epaulette manner. Usually there would be a strap on the shoulder and then the epaulette would slide on and off that, sort of for cleaning and washing the jacket, but I'm never going to be doing that with this jacket, so I can just freely sew the actual epaulettes onto the cape itself. It's a little bit of a difficult process. The epaulettes are kind of thick and stiff and I need to get a leather needle to pierce through the hard layers of cardboard or whatever it is in these, but they're going straight on there because honestly, this is a Febreze only kind of garment. And that's it. That is Char Aznable's jacket finished.
Gamers, we finished it. We didn't finish it. I have all the accessories to make. I still have the wig to style. I have the belt. I have the helmet. I have the boots. I have a lot more to do, but like for now, this is pretty good. I'm quite enjoying it.